Now Habersham is proud to sponsor interviews with the candidates for the May 24th political primaries. We hope by viewing these personal interviews, you'll get to know the candidates who will be making decisions that impact your life, your family, and your livelihood here at the local and state level in Georgia. We hope you'll vote May 24th, and we hope you'll be more informed in that process by hearing from the candidates themselves in these one-on-one interviews sponsored by Now Habersham. Hi, this is Now Habersham, and today we're visiting with George Christian, candidate and incumbent for District Attorney in Habersham County. Welcome, George, to Now Habersham.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start off with, you've been in this position already, but some people may not know you that well. Let's talk about your formal education to prepare yourself as a District Attorney. What about the education part of that side?
Certainly. Once I finished the United States Navy, I graduated from the University of Georgia with a bachelor's in political science. Then I went to Mercer Law School and graduated from there, and then started my career as a career prosecutor here in Georgia.
Mm-hmm. The other side of that experience or education is the experience you've had along the way, careers, opportunities you've had, or things you've learned outside of, say, a classroom. What have you learned about those things that have prepared you to be the DA?
Well, first of all, out of law school, I went to work in Houston County as an assistant district attorney. There I tried a lot of cases, murder cases, child molestation cases, everything in between. When I left there, I was chief of the district attorney's office, and I worked there for about 8 years, and I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Macon. In the Middle District of Georgia, we prosecuted federal crimes in 70 counties, and there I prosecuted primarily white-collar crimes, had a lot of trial experience doing that as well. And when I left there, I was chief of the criminal division, which meant I oversaw the federal criminal prosecutions in 70 counties. I supervised 15 or 17 assistant United States attorneys, support staff. And so I was involved in management at that point, leadership, mentoring of lawyers. And so once I left that office, I came up here, started working for Brian Rickman, who was district attorney there. Worked for him for about 4 years and was chief assistant district attorney when Brian was appointed to the Georgia Court of Appeals.
Mm-hmm. Now, the average citizen may not know intricately some of the challenges of the DA's office in Habersham County, or some of the problems or even goals we might have for the future. So could you speak a little bit to anything you think we might need to change, or goals you have in that role?
Certainly. Well, of course, it's not just Habersham County. We're in the Mountain Judicial Circuit, so it's no problem. Rabun County, Habersham County, and Stevens counties. We have 3 staffed offices, so each one of them is a little different, but the goal is the same, and that is to prosecute folks in an orderly judicial fashion. As far as goals and things of that nature, we still have one opening in Rabun County. Maggie Hastings was the assistant district attorney up there. She went to work for Brian in the Georgia Court of Appeals as a staff attorney, so we need to replace her. And then we'll be at full speed as far as personnel goes. A couple of things I'd like to do is try to expand the drug courts that we have here in the Mountain Judicial Circuit. Part of that will depend upon resource availability. One of the things we're looking at is expanding the drug courts to incorporate more of a mental health court as well, because what we found is so many of our folks who are in drug courts for abuse-type problems, substance abuse-type problems, also bring in a lot of baggage, so to speak, because of prior abuse as children, things of that nature. So there's a mental health component to that we'd like to improve upon. So that's one of the things I'd like to see done to change the office.
Let me ask you a question, George. There's been a lot of discussion all over the United States today, and even in the political races, way beyond the Mountain District and even the state of Georgia, about crowding of the jails and the sentencing of not drug traffickers or people who sell drugs, but the people who are caught with small amounts of drugs. And there's been a move in a lot of states, even in our state, to try to reduce the prison population and try to redirect these people with education of some kind, rehabilitation. What do you see these people on a day in and day out basis? What do you think about this, and maybe speak to that?
Certainly. Well, coming out of Atlanta, as you just alluded to, is the Criminal Justice Reform Acts that we're seeing each year. And the goal is only to incarcerate in the state prisons dangerous people, people who we're afraid of, not people we're mad at or disappointed in. And so in our circuit, as in most circuits around the state, people who are using drugs, people who are committing property crimes to commit drugs, are the bulk of the cases that go through our court system. And so the best way to address those is not by sending them to prison because they don't come out rehabilitated or cured of their addiction, but is to try to have the accountability type courts where they learn to deal with their addiction, come off their addiction. And the best thing about that is not only are you stopping addiction in that one individual, you're stopping a cycle of generational addiction and all the fallout that comes from living in a house in which there's addiction. Typically, children of addicted parents are going to become addicts themselves, or they're going to commit crimes themselves. And so if we can break that cycle, then that's the most cost-effective way to address that issue in the criminal justice system.
All good ideas have a price tag. There's probably very few people who would disagree with this whole idea. But how do we pay to rehabilitate people with drug addiction? Where does that money come from, and where do we create the programs to make it happen? And I realize they're private programs, but some of those programs are tens of thousands of dollars for just one run through it. So let's take a family who has a serious, the parents have a serious drug problem, and they have no money. What do we do?
Well, that's a great question because there's no great answer to that. We have a case now in Rabun County where we're trying to find a private facility who will take someone directly from jail into their facility and allow that person to start working at some point in time to pay for the cost of that facility. Now, there's some of those, but then there are the really expensive ones that you're talking about. And the success of them depends upon not only their program, and you need an evidence-based treatment program. It can be either with a religious background or not, but in any event, you need a good structured program in order to reach the people who are there to be treated for their addiction. But the other kind of side of the coin to that is people generally are not going to readily accept and take on treatment until they're ready for it. We use a term, and you've heard the term I'm sure used before, until they hit bottom. And sometimes when you force somebody into treatment early on, when they're not ready for it, you're just hitting your head against the wall. In terms of cost and where that comes from, the governor has been really good about putting taxpayer money into the accountability courts and helping to expand those. One of the things they're doing in conjunction with that is keeping track of the success. Nationally, what we understand is that the repeat offenders are less who go through accountability courts than if you put them in prison. So the whole idea is it's cheaper to go through accountability courts, things of that nature, than it would be to send people to prison. I think it'll be 5 or 6 years down the road before we'll have any good statistics from the state of Georgia, but we're hopeful that they'll mimic what we found nationwide, and that is that accountability courts work and they're cost efficient.
Mm-hmm. Now, you work closely, you have worked closely and would work closely with the sheriff's office, the law enforcement of our county. And that election is also being held right now, and you were at the event the other night. So what kinds of things, general things, would a good district attorney look for in a good sheriff? In other words, what you have to work closely with the chief law enforcement officer of the county. What do you look for? What kind of personal qualities are important?
Well, I've been
I'm not asking you to speak to any candidate.
Certainly.
Just generally, what do you need? What makes your job better?
As a former ADA in Houston County, as a former federal prosecutor, and also as a prosecutor here, what we look for is integrity. That's important. If you have integrity, I think everything else will come into play. All the folks are competent. Anybody can learn a job, but you need that integrity, that strong moral foundation at the bottom. Of course, training, education helps, but experience is important as well. But you have to have integrity and honesty and openness at the foundation, and everything else will come to fruition on its own, I believe.
I have a real poignant question for you, George. We don't really know each other. We've met a couple of days, and I've listened to you speak, and I've gotten to know you a little bit better. So I have a personal question for you.
Certainly.
I get the feeling that if you were a full-time practicing attorney, you would be very successful, and I guess you have been also as well. But as the DA, you have a salary and you have the job. Why do you seek a job like this?
Well, I've been in public service my whole life. After I got out of the Navy, I was an ADA, Assistant United States Attorney, and then I worked for Bryan for about 4 years. And I love the work. I feel like we help people. As an ADA or as a district attorney, you're closer to people than you are when you're a federal prosecutor. It's a completely different ball game. Some similarities, but different. But as a state prosecutor, you can really have an impact on individual lives and help them. And you have the sense of being part of the community and helping people, and that's what I enjoy doing. That's just what I feel like I'm here for.
As an incumbent, you've already fulfilled this job, and you're looking to do it again. Speaking for the future, how will the Mountain District be better with you in that position?
Well, that question in and of itself suggests perhaps that any former regime wasn't the best, and I certainly wouldn't want to.
I'm not associated.
I know. Brian Rickman did a wonderful job. He created so much goodwill in the communities that we serve. I believe that my background from the experience of prosecution, mentoring young lawyers, being involved in people's lives, being very close to victims for my 30-plus years of prosecution, my love of people will lend itself to creating a very good district attorney's office. We have a great staff. I think of them as a family. I want to build the trust and love, in that family, and then spread it among the law enforcement agencies here, not only in Habersham but Rabun and Stevens, and then expand that to the community as well.
We've been visiting with George Christian, incumbent for the Mountain District District Attorney, and George, we wish you best of luck.
Thank you.
This is Now Habersham, and today we're speaking with Bruce Russell, a candidate for District Attorney of Habersham County. Bruce, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start off with your formal education, schoolwork. Let's tell us about the things that have an impact on you as a District Attorney from formal education standpoint.
Well, from a formal education standpoint, I grew up in Rabun County and went to Rabun County High School. After Rabun County High School, I went to the University of Colorado, and I had degrees in political science and economics from the University of Colorado. I went into the United States Navy after college, and spent 6 years in the Navy. I started out in the Navy as a military policeman, and then later on when I went to sea, I was a security team leader for a security detail for a search and seizure team. So that's also quite a bit of law enforcement experience there, enforcing the law on the high seas. After I got out of the Navy, I went to Mercer Law School in Macon, Georgia, and I graduated from Mercer with a law degree and a certificate in legal writing from the writing program there at Mercer.
Let's talk a little bit about informal education and experiences or job work that are related to your job, would be related to your job as a district attorney. What can you tell us about those things in preparing you for that job?
Right. Well, I've done I've been a criminal defense attorney in Rabun County, Habersham, and Stevens. I've also done some work in DeKalb and Cobb counties as well. I think the role as a defense attorney is very similar to the role as a district attorney, and I feel like with just my experience in the criminal justice system, representing clients, has prepared me well to step into the role of district attorney. Even though it is kind of switching sides, so to speak, it's not a big leap to go from the defense side to the prosecution side.
What would you say are some of the challenges facing the DA's office here in Habersham County?
I think the biggest challenge for any district attorney is going to be managing the caseload. And those caseloads, they grow larger and larger every day. And we just have to attack that caseload with leadership at the top and trying to make sure that all of the staff, all the other prosecutors have the resources that they need in order to go forward and keep that caseload from overwhelming them.
I know you know this as just being an attorney, but also in the media. All over the country, there's been a move in the past couple of years to sort of stop the flow of nonviolent, drug-offending, guilty citizens into the state prison system, and to, in fact, find a way to rehabilitate them seriously. And not just a short program, but to get them back into our society off drugs, because it impacts their family, particularly if they're a parent. How do you feel about that? And particularly, what about the funding of it? What should we do as the DA to think about not sending quite so many people who don't sell narcotics, but who are using them and being caught with them?
Right. Well, to answer the first part of your question, in the past, it has sort of just been a very cursory type program. Basically just sending these folks off to jail for a few months and hoping that when they come back they're going to be clean. Sort of the whole idea of if we put them in jail they won't be using there and they'll be dried out when they come out. We've seen that that's not been a very successful way of doing things. I think that the drug courts and the funding that we've got from the state and also from our local agencies to put in a serious program that puts rehabilitation at the forefront. And when I mean real rehabilitation, I don't just mean therapy. I mean some sort of supervision, encouragement, requiring them to get a job and putting them out into the workforce and back into their communities while going through this process of rehabilitation, makes us all have a stake in their sobriety. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what has led to a lot of success in those drug court programs and trying to keep folks out of jail.
Bruce, as the DA, you would work most closely with the sheriff, or very closely with the sheriff as well as others.
Absolutely.
And of course we have an election going on, and you saw the debate the other night here in our county. So tell me, aside from these particular candidates, what would you, as the DA, look for in a good sheriff in your relationship with that person? Well,
the district attorney is one of his duties that's enumerated by law. He has the duty to advise the police on warrants and searches and how to follow the law, the correct way to investigate crime. And I think any good sheriff is going to want to utilize the DA's office, as most effectively as he possibly can. From a DA standpoint, the way that I look at that is that I will make myself available to the sheriff, to any of the deputies, the chiefs of all the municipalities. Let them know that we're here and ready to conduct training, to review case files, to review their procedures if that's what they feel is the best way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a great topic. The 7 municipalities in Habersham County particularly. So what would you foresee that in terms of the DA's office and working together with law enforcement in those counties? Do you see, what would be your outlook about that?
Well, I've actually talked with quite a few officers when I've been out there on the campaign trail, and they wholeheartedly are very supportive of the DA's office, trying to not necessarily come in and dictate a whole lot of policy, but to come in and make some suggestions about how we get case files from the police departments and all the municipalities up to the DA's office with the proper paperwork, and make sure that all of the procedures have been followed, so that when we do get those cases in the district attorney's office, then they're easier to handle. And that's better for the police officers too, because it reduces their workload for those cases on the back end.
A couple of quick questions. Are you a registered voter?
I am a registered voter.
Okay. I came here 27 years ago from Texas, where there are very straight lines about your job as a public servant, and that you can't have other businesses that might profit from your role that you're elected to. And
Right.
in Georgia, there seem to be a lot of people under the Gold Dome who own businesses or represent other people in businesses, and they make decisions that impact that, and maybe financial ones as well.
Right.
So do you own a business that you would grow financially from that was somehow related to the DA's office?
No, and in fact, it would be the opposite. I have a private law practice that I practice law in Raven County, and it's based in Raven County, but I practice here in Habersham. I would have to close that practice. I would no longer be able to take private clients, and it actually is part of the oath that a district attorney takes, that they will accept no other compensation than what's provided by the state.
And you would follow that oath?
Absolutely.
Okay. How will the DA's office in Habersham County be different with Bruce Russell leading it?
Well, it's going to be a very open and very transparent office. I'm going to make sure that the DA's office is out there in the community when there are issues that citizens are concerned about. Then we're going to be at the forefront answering those questions and trying to solve those problems. I really feel like it's one of the duties of the district attorney's office to participate in a lot of community outreach, especially with a lot of the organizations in our community, not just in Habersham County, but in Rabun and Stevens as well, that fight domestic violence and child abuse. And I'm very familiar with those organizations. A lot of them utilize private attorneys, and I've had the good fortune of being able to work with those organizations as an attorney and also as a supporter. So as far as the district attorney's office underneath Bruce Russell, it'll be one that's very open and very has a lot of community outreach.
One final question for you, Bruce.
Sure.
And this was brought up the other night as well, but it wasn't in your when you were up there, I don't think.
Yeah.
What's your thought about attorneys and others following the law and knowing, and if you have evidence that they have not, or law enforcement officials, what is your thought about being responsible to correct that situation? Let's talk about the no-knock warrants.
Okay.
That's a big issue in this county. It costs millions of dollars to settle, and a child was injured, trying to find a drug user. So,
Right.
How do you feel about that as a DA in our county? You were there and you realized that it was pretty much sentiment that no-knock warrants, unless in an extreme case, I think everybody, well, actually two of the candidates said not at all. One has changed their opinion a little bit.
No-knock warrants are, that's a serious, situation when a no-knock warrant is called for. And from my own personal opinion, I don't believe that no-knock warrants should be used, very frequently. I think that I wouldn't say that we would never have to use them, because you can't, none of us have a crystal ball, and none of us can see into the future and see exactly what circumstances might prevent themselves. But as far as a standard procedure within the DA's office, I would definitely discourage the use of no-knock warrants in this part of the state.
We've been visiting with Bruce Russell, a candidate for the district attorney in Habersham County. Bruce, good luck to you.
Thank you.
We hope you've benefited from these interviews sponsored by Now Habersham. And we want to remind you, be sure to vote May 24th.